Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to get into the Tribulation series again. But what we're going to do is deal with really specific questions. These are questions that some of you brought up. These are questions that I kind of had as I was going through it, but they really weren't in the process of Revelation 6 to Revelation 19 necessarily. They weren't in those processes, but there were things that were brought up by other people and brought up also by me kind of thinking, I need to look at this. My son, who knows his end time stuff better than a lot of Christians do, like had me writing down a billion of these, and we started looking at some of the questions. But he just was sitting there like bam, 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 bam. And it was totally fun together. So it's a great time with my son, who's 25, and so he helped me with some of the concepting of the questions that I probably wouldn't have really come up with that in that same way. So that's what we're going to get into today and give you a lot more information about that. Coming right up. Okay, so just before we get started, hey man, do me a favor, share this with your friends. Like, subscribe to this. You know, it helps my channel. I never ask anything from you guys, like to buy or sell anything. Please don't. I mean, you want to buy a book, that's fine, but I don't ask you to do anything. If you want to go to the website and give and donate to me, that's fine. You don't have to. But the biggest thing for me is like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps. Okay. So let's start this off. And we're going to talk about the Left Behind series. Many of you, if you've looked at the stuff, you know what that is. Some of you don't know what that is. The series started, say this right. Please don't quote me on this. I'm just off of memory here. I think it was like 96, 97. And then it was a 12-part series. Now they went and did um, and it's fiction. Okay, they went and did this a little farther with a couple other books around it. You know, in the Millennial Reign, they also did some prequels, and then they did ones for kids and some other kinds of stuff out there. Plus another little book I'll show you here in a minute. Now there are wonderful things about it, but there's also some difficulties in there too. But what you need to know is I'm not trying to beat this up, okay? I'm trying to share with you a point here. Now, some of you go, well, I hate the series. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit more, okay? So as we go through this a little bit, we're going to show you a little bit. This actually is a book, very interesting, that is nonfiction. No, Tim LaHaye's written it when he was alive. Tim LaHaye wrote a ton of books, all kinds of different things. This guy's a major theologian. You might not like it, but that is who he is. Now, Jerry B. Jenkins was the fiction writer, okay? And then they did a book that was really interesting that was talked about. These will not be left behind. People came to Christ in because of this series. Now, some people who have beat this up or beat the concept up, well, they came to Christ in a fake way. And I'm like going, oh no, oh no, that is absolutely a wrong perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But some of the basics of this thing, the authors continuously present the gospel. I mean, and listen, I have been through that series personally, reading it at least twice. I have listened to the audiobook, even just recently, but but I've listened to that kind of stuff. Now, in the beginning, that actually framed a lot of my information, or earlier on. Okay. Now, I've been studying this since 1982, I think it was. So I've been studying way before that. Now, this helped me a little bit, but beyond that time frame, a lot of my real end time research that got very serious was way after the series ever ended. Okay. So you guys have to know this has got some foundational kind of knowledge with that, but they shared the gospel message every single time. Okay. And so that's one thing that's a real powerful point in there. Another one is it's relatively foundational for end time issues and with a massive appeal. Now, listen, hey, as a fiction writer myself, they had they had some great fictional points, and I'll kind of mention a little bit about that. Um, well, before I do that, let me back one step up here. Here's the thing that happens. Um, when you're writing fiction, you have to have like the antagonist and the protagonist. Your protagonist is the good guy in essence, and the bad guy is the antagonist. But really good fiction, especially if you're going to do a 12-part series, actually has multiple characters going in different directions. They have not just one major challenge, they have multiple challenges. So the conflict could be, the person against the environment, the person against the government, the person against the person against the weather. Or a million other little things, even against themselves, even against their physical, ailments, whatever that might be. And when you add those kinds of levels, it actually makes an intriguing point. And because you're in one of the worst and most complicated time frames and the most traumatic time frames of history, it actually lends that self to it. Now, one thing that was a little struggle is the Kingdom Come book that was later on. It was in the Millennial Reign, so the conflict was lacking only because you're in a time frame where there's very little conflict. Now, there's always stuff to talk about the Millennial Reign, and I do that a lot. But that was some really powerful point here too. So that's actually why it has some global appeal. And I mean, no one would pick up that book. 12 different publishing groups wouldn't pick up the book until Tyndale jumped in, and they made a gob amount of money off of that thing. Okay, so a little bit more about this. This was roundly hated by pastors, teachers, and seminary professors. I mean, over and over again. And it's because they got, and most of the people that I actually talked to about this never went past the first book. I mean, roundly couldn't go past the first book. Now, listen, if I can't stand a series or whatever, I'm not going to go past it. Okay, do you get the idea? I mean, if I don't like making up something, if I don't like Clive Cussler or whatever, and I'm not a real Clive Cussler kind of fan, or if I was, there was some other, Western, series or whatever, I don't care about it, right? But I'm probably not going to preach against that one, even though I just don't like it with that, because to preach and to teach upon something, you really have to get the full flavor of the whole books. And very few people that I've interacted with and talked to physically or within that movements, they really didn't read the series. I would say it's like reading the first chapter of a math textbook and really not liking it. Okay. You got to finish the whole textbook before you can actually grade the abilities of the textbook. That's one thing I have a lot of troubles with. Like it or hate it. I'm not trying to tell you to hate it. I'm not trying to tell you you should love it. I'm telling you you should research something. And if you haven't researched it, just like I haven't researched a particular series of whatever, or I haven't really looked into that, I'm probably not that kind of expert. Make sense? Now, one of the things that they didn't like about this is the pre-tribulation rapture. Now, we'll show you more about that in this. And if you've watched the series, you see this pre-tribulation. Rapture is the Latin word for caught up. Now, in Greek, and this is one of my favorite ones. People go, the rapture's not in the Bible. I'm going, yes, it is. The word is in Latin. The Greek is called harpazo, H-A-R, Harpazo. I had to do it in sign language. So just to give you an idea, and that means caught up. Now, one of the most powerful verses, obviously, is 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 18. When people who don't like the pre-trib rapture point, they say, you guys take your information from Matthew 24. No one out there takes their pre-tribulation rapture information from Matthew chapter 24. No one does. It's great information, but it has nothing to do with the pre-tribulation rapture. They see this as escapism. Now, pastors and teachers get real upset about that because the people are escaping from trials. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go along here, okay? The second part that I see And it well, this is partly related to the escapism, as the church must be purified, refined, purified by fire, refined in the gold. And they see the portions that says making yourself pure, and they even say that you will go through trials and tribulations. Now, the problem that happens when you see the word tribulations in most sections, when then they're looking at that, it calls itself pressure or thlipsis. Thlipsis is like taking I'm making up something. I just had a peanut butter jelly sandwich, okay? And if I take that peanut butter jelly sandwich and do this and start smashing it, obviously don't have much, I've got peanut butter all over the place, but I'm pressing it together and compressing it. That's what thlipsis means, okay? But that's not what the real tribulation thing, the whole time frame of the tribulation is about. It's way deeper than that. Matthew 24, I want to say 26, but I might be off on that one, 25. It stipulates that if the days are not limited, no flesh would survive. Okay, that's a level of way saying, go, listen, dude, we're talking about post-apocalyptic, all those movies where no one even exists. I mean, there's not like a little enclave like Mad Max had, one of the first post-apocalyptic movies out there, where in Australia they just had this little thing. No, 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 no one survives. That's the level of that point, and they have to. God has to limit the days. So purifying yourself by just destroying isn't really right. And it also cheapens the blood of Christ. There's nothing you can do. The second you become saved, and saved, Romans 10, 9, and 10, you are clean in Christ. And I'm going to pull this off the screen for just a second, okay? Here. But I want you to see my point. When you're saved as Jesus is Lord and your Savior kind of thing, and you really do that, and you are you at first you're a child of God, and I always talk about this, and you're moving yourself into the adult nature of yourself, which is called the bride of Christ, Ephesians 5:25-ish range. It's the second part of that chapter. When you do that, Jesus took everything, past, present, and future. Now, bad company corrupts good character, as 1 Corinthians talks about. But you can't like make yourself better in any way, shape, and form. And so to be refined by the fire is kind of a difficult point. Part of that is in 1 Corinthians 3:13-18 that talks about that. But when it talks about that, it's talking about what you would present through your life. See, 1 Corinthians is one of the most powerful things. It talks about the smeltering of gold. When you put gold through a fire, what you're doing is burning away what's called the dross. And it's the stuff you don't want, right? So you burn it away so that you have the pure, refined gold in that way. That's what it's getting after. Okay? When you have that kind of concept, it actually stipulates your foundation's built in Christ. What you build upon it is burned in the fire. If it's just a whole bunch of firewood, in essence, well, that's going to get burned away. If it's gold, silver, and precious stones, well, that's going to make it through, right? But both ways, it's talking about those who are in Christ. There are people who don't spend any time building upon their spirit, and they got nothing when they walk into heaven. In essence, they walk into heaven naked, right? Just like someone who had a salvation experience 5 seconds before they die, okay, and then they go into heaven. But that's one of the problems that people miss. They think that there's something that you have to do to make yourself better, and the answer is you are taken care of. You are the bride of Christ. You just need to recognize that. And that's a real big point, because Romans 7 tells you of that same thing. There's nothing I can do in my flesh to make myself better. That's a really powerful area. Who will rescue me from this wretched man of sin? When I walk in the Spirit, I am not in the sin point. And that gets people like so sideways, but it's reality of what Christ did. There is no name under heaven by which we may be saved. Acts 4:12. Okay? So that's one of the areas that they struggle heartily, but I think it's more of a theological discussion, which any end time person needs to have the first coming understood fully before you can really address the second. Now, sorry, another thing would be is again, and we say this all the time, but can the tribulation accomplish purification? This is Romans 5. I'm doing this like kind of fast here. Romans 5, 3 through 5. Let me just kind of show you what those things say. And not only that, but we rejoice in the afflictions, which we know afflictions produce endurance. Endurance produces proven character. Proven character produces hope. Now, none of that is talking about, sorry, my dogs are going off here. None of that is talking about tribulation the way that we're talking about it. You have to understand the purpose of the tribulation. And the purpose of the tribulation is to bring all of humanity who is so out of sync with God into sync with Him. That's essentially the whole point. I mean, if it's about judgment, Jesus has already done the judgment. He doesn't even need 5 seconds to judge the world. So it's not about judgment. It's about pushing people to make a decision. Go right, go left, no in between. That's what the tribulation is about. If you miss that, you're missing the whole point here. Okay? And that goes for people who love the series and who don't love the series. Okay? And there are parts of that even that gets a little bit missed in there. And then there's this ongoing debate about post-trib, pre-trib, and mid-trib. Now, basically, I said to this before, a pre-tribulation rapture is a rapture point of before the tribulation that the church goes away, in the middle of the tribulation where they go up in a middle time frame, and then they talk about post-trib. Now, post-trib actually used to actually mean at the end of the tribulation, up until about 2000. No one actually pays attention to this, but I've been in this too long, in 41 years, 42 years of studying it. After Y2K and then 9/11, people started to adjust their viewpoint because they say Hebrews talks about we are not appointed for wrath. And then they would go, okay, so they called it a pre-wrath position, which is just a little bit, weeks, days, whatever, before the end of the tribulation. And so that's the ongoing debate. So if you have this, these people have this points, they'll love it or hate it, right? Okay. So that's some of the background of that kind of thing. So that's what I'm trying to say. Know what you know what you believe, and then study it all the way through before you're going to make a whole preaching series on that. Okay? Okay, so here's some of the basics behind the Left Behind series. We talked a little bit about this, but it's a 12-part series. They're prequels. And they start before the tribulation, beginning at the rapture of the church, and then it goes all the way through the great wrath of the Lamb, and then a few days after, up to a little bit of time afterward for the 12-part main part of the series. And those are the ones that you can kind of look up when you do that. I will say it is absolutely some of the best fiction that you can come up with. And Christian readers, especially in 1995, didn't have a lot. And we really don't have a lot when we look at real good fiction. So I don't care how you feel about this, but you have to identify that it was preaching the gospel and that it is some of the best fiction out there. Tim LaHaye keeps biblically oriented in the information, whereas Jerry B. Jenkins is doing the fictional portions to move along the story. So you kind of see the interchange a bit if you really pay attention and you know a little bit about Tim LaHaye and you see the Jerry B. Jenkins. So there's probably conflict. And listen, as a person who wrote a book with Dr. Jeff Swanson, we love each other. Don't get me wrong. But there are always conflicts because, well, I think it's this way. I think it's this way. And then we had to argue it through. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I guarantee those two guys cussed and fussed over that particular areas. Okay. So that happens. That's totally normal with that too. Now, some of the biggest controversies, again, the pre-tribulation rapture, and then there's also pre-millennial positions. Now, I told you a little bit about this, but the pre-trib, the church goes before the tribulation, whereas the mid is the middle, post is the post, and then we have that pre-wrath position. Okay. Now, there's also people who have this thing called premillennial. So when we talk about the millennial, I'll talk about pre, post, and mid, but that's not anything to do with the tribulation or the rapture. This is talking about where the tribulation is. So pre-millennial believes, and it's very scripturally sound. Okay, this particular one is where most people really, actually, if you believe in Christ, you really need to be here. And I'll explain that in a second. The tribulation comes first, and then the millennial reign comes second when you're talking about the order of an end. That's how the Bible presents it over and over again. And there's reasons for that. And there's reasons why Jesus comes back after the tribulation and, in essence, steps onto the planet. Okay. And we talk a lot about this. Now, post millennial people believe that Christ returns after the millennial reign, but never before. He's never shown up in the clouds. He never has any kind of point in there. Now, but they actually deny that the tribulation even occurs, in essence, that we're kind of living in a tribulation, and that Christ will just suddenly return without any tribulational points, and then we go through the millennial reign. And I see this all the time. Actually, Stephen King, not a believer, okay, when you listen to some of his books or movies, you will see that same kind of thing. They kind of perceive like, and he uses like the rapture happens and then Jesus returns and then we have all heaven and earth kind of thing. And this is a dangerous position because it discounts 650 scriptures that are about the millennium, about the tribulation. Now, let me say something to you. If the Bible calls itself the most perfect book, it calls itself the truth, and I mean truth from top to bottom. All scriptures God breathed, approved for teaching and reproof. And it goes over and over and over about truth. Why do you, as the reader, the informational person, get to skip those verses? I don't know. There are verses in the Bible that I personally have skipped in the past. God has like beat the snot out of me going, why are you doing that? I didn't put it in there. Maybe you don't understand it. It's okay to shove it in your notes, which I have a notes section in my Bible and my HCSB, the Olive Street Study Bible. And the reason why I love it is that I can put notes all over and put them in orders. And I have a whole section of do not understand. I don't know where to put it. It's okay. But to diss those verses says that you really didn't believe the Bible. And if you don't get to believe in those ones, did Jesus really rise from the dead? I mean, when does it end? Right? Now, the amillennial position says they don't expect any tribulation, and they deny the millennial reign, but then all things sort of end at some point in time, and then we're here. It's like, it's kind of a crazy position because they kind of almost think that they sort of went through it, or they didn't really do it, but they don't really have a millennial reign either. And it's so then it skips over 650 tribulation verses and more than 300 verses on the millennial reign. So you're going, well, how do I believe that one either? Because these two last positions are very anti-biblical. They skip over verses, and I seriously caution you. If you look into that viewpoint, I seriously caution you not to go into those areas. I don't care. You can do whatever you want to, but that's what the Bible says about itself. So sorry, I'm not going to go there with you. Okay. So here's some significant areas of truth that you can find. It's got beautiful fiction, amazing characters. They're very full. You see the full character arc. I'm super about character arc as a writer. Okay. That So we're just talking about the Left Behind series. We're not talking about it in all the theological natures, but we're just talking about the beautiful fiction and a full arc of a character. Now, you'll read books, or you listen to books, or you watch a TV movie or a TV series, for instance, and you'll see a character arc, and they just like don't explain what happened to her. At the end of it, you're like, what happened? And they never tell you the final point of the arc. That is a really bad writer. That's a very horrible writer because the audience is begging for it. Now, I'm not talking about not answering questions, but with your characters that are the main characters, you have to actually deal with them. Now, the Antichrist in the one of the good things, the Antichrist is the beginning of the tribulation. He also desecrates the temple, which is actually this follows along with Daniel 9:27. It also follows along with Revelation 6:2, Revelation 13:1. I mean, just a huge, and 2 Thessalonians 2 through 5 or so. It deals with those things and it does it correctly. So that's a point that you can kind of see in there. The fifth trumpet. Now, I call that the zombie trumpet. This is the fifth trumpet, would be later in the tribulation, no matter how you view of that kind of stuff. That particular one, they portray it beautifully. These are people who will be stung by a really gross creature and they cannot die for 5 months. And he does it really, really well. It's one of the first times I'd ever seen a book series actually handle something that was very significant. And it launched me into lots of other research. And you should look into research. Even if you don't like some portions of a series, God might be instructing you to look into that further. And that's what he did with me. And that's what he can do with you. Again, I'm not saying you should read this. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just telling you the kind of balance point here. All right. World War III. This would be what I would call the second seal. And you might disagree with that. I mean, someone got on there like, "Oh, I think World War III was the Cold War." Okay, you pick the number that you like better. But I'm just saying officially, because World War III, that I would say is the second seal, that actually goes along with the plagues and the inflation issues that are handled in the second, third, and fourth seals, are handled very correctly. I don't know that I would say it goes as deep as I wish it would, but it's handled very correctly because this was really, in those three seals, you're going to see about 1.875 billion approximately die. So they do that pretty darn well. They also deal with martyrs. It's very crisp. It's fully understood. There's a more powerful way than most people look at that because the martyrs in the now it's not perfect. Okay, the real martyrs are ones that they die for their belief. Now he does extend it, or the pair extend that a little bit more to other people that might have died for situations, but they really didn't die for their faith. They might have died because of plague or other war issues. The character of Bruce Barnes gets a little lost in that, and they call him a martyr, and I would disagree with that one. But it's a light disagreement that I'm not going to really focus too heavily on. Now, in the very last day, this is the great day of the wrath of the Lamb, they extend that day longer. It's one of the first ones that actually does it correctly, that Zechariah talks about, that Malachi refers to as well, that is an extended day. Jesus actually deals with it a little bit. And so the overall layout of the great day of the wrath of the Lamb is pretty darn precise and pretty darn accurate with that too. The remnant, this is one of the first ones that actually talks about the remnant in a correct pattern. This is the last third of Jewish people who are on the earth. First, 2/3 of them will die or being killed off. Okay, Satan through the Antichrist is doing his job there. But these are the last ones, and these are Jewish people. You want to call yourself the remnant? I'd say, no, you're not. that actually is a pronouncement upon you that you're going to go through way more severe issues than anyone else is actually going to go through. And I mean, he will take out his. I mean, the Satan, Revelation 12, will show you it takes out wrath like nobody's business. Okay, that really is about the Jews because the tribulation is more about the Jews than you ever know. Now, there's Gentiles that come into thing, but it's about bringing the Jews back into the fold. It also is a very foundational overall issue, as we've discussed and rediscussed. It overall it does some great points about there, and actually, it's taught a lot of people to go into Revelation 1 verse 3. It says, those who study, pay attention to, keep it deep in your heart. I mean, that means like a level of study that very rarely is ever spoken of in the Word. And it says that there's a special blessing for those kind of people that do that. And that's a very relevant point. So I think that people who will take the time to move through that series, if you don't know a lot about it, it's very helpful. Okay. I have some books that go, I think, a little deeper with that. But listen, I'm not trying to beat that up because there's some great stuff in there. Okay. Now, as I move into this next area, I'm going to talk about areas of lack. This is not trying to like make them horrible and nasty here. Okay, it's not trying to tick you off here, but I want you to see some areas that you can find in all kinds of writing. Now, the 144,000 that we'll talk about, and we'll show you more in a next graph there. 144,000 is a very confined description. It happens in Revelation 7 verse 1 all the way through Revelation 7 verse 9. It picks it up in the first portion of Revelation 14. And so when you go through those directly, there are several points that happens. They're young Jewish men who have never had sex with a woman, and they're sealed of God. It's the very first group that even talks about this. And no other person in the world has ever been sealed of God, which means that no one can harm them. It means that no one of these people can die. The problem that happens in the series is they list out Zion ben Judah. He was married with children, and his kids and his wife die, and then he dies at the very end. So I'd say that's a really problematic point. They put a lot into the Zion ben Judah point, but it doesn't mean that he actually fits. If you really wanted to handle that very well, he might have been, the older teenager or the 24-year-old living with his parents, and his parents were killed off. He exists all the way through the time frame with uncanny knowledge. That probably been a little bit better way of handling that than how they did it. So they could have had the same character, just a couple little tweaks would have made a little bit better theological sense. Chaim Rosenzweig, sorry, hard one to say, he's also an old man at the time of his conversion. And so, he lives, but that's an old man. That doesn't align perfectly in there. There's also a fascinating part that I will tell you that most people miss, and this is one of the most powerful statements for a mid-tribulation rapture. And so what it says, it starts off in Revelation 7 verse 9. Okay, Revelation 7 1 through 8 talks all about the people. Sorry, it talks all about the 144,000. Sets up who they are. Then it says, and I'm going to do a little English with you. Okay, after this I looked. Now, if I said to you, story, and then after this I stepped outside. Now, if you were like, you happen to like walk in the middle of a conversation, and I said, and all you heard is after this I stepped outside, you're like, wait, after what? I mean, I'm referring backward, grammatically, I'm referring backward to the conversation I just talked about, right? Then I'm bringing you forward into this point. But it is a adverbial phrase that you take and you utilize to connect the paragraphs or sentences before connect the sentence that you're bringing up right now here. Okay? This is actually a paragraph in one verse. After this, I looked, and there was a vast multitude of every nation, tribe, people, language, which no one could count, standing before the throne, before the Lamb. They were robed in white with palm branches in their hands. And some people mistakenly look at this as the martyrs. They're actually handled a little differently at later points. Okay, and even Jesus talks about this. So it talks about that they washed the robes, made them white in the blood of the Lamb, and so that's a different thing. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're martyred. How do you wash your robe in the blood of the Lamb? By salvation. That's in Revelation 7, verse 14, what I just said to you. It's not martyrs because they absolutely are handled a little differently. Now, I've always told you when John is looking at the earth, he's talking in a timeline. When he moves into heaven, when he ever does this, he breaks timeline with people. So this is one of the areas. Let me say this to you. There's two ways you get to leave this planet for every single person in the history of the world. Number one, you die. Simple, right? That's just super simple. Everyone's going to die. But let me tell you about a couple people who never died. Elijah gets taken up in a chariot and whoop, he tells, Elisha, if you get to watch me, you get to have a double blessing if you're there watching me. Okay, cool. And he did. Enoch, back in Genesis, was walking with the Lord, and then he just basically, hey, let's go on toward my house more than yours. He lives 365 days or years, basically like a year. It's a real interesting way that you explain it, but he is no more, and there is no death of them. Whereas Moses and Enoch, Moses and every other person does die. Okay, but it intimates a point of no death, and this group cannot be killed. There's only one way to leave the planet if you can't be killed: a rapture. It's a backward inference of a point of rapture issues that comes up. So again, they also says this too. Now again, if we can't die, he or she gets to go to heaven. So that's a heaven's thing. And then they actually use this really weird, and this is in Revelation 14. It talks about that they sing a song that no one can sing. I'm like, wait, cherubs and cherubim and seraphim, kind of minister at the throne. Now, it's not that they sing. You got to miss the inferences of those. But it doesn't mean they can't sing. They're saying about this group of people, the young men who never had sex with a woman, sealed of God, so they can't be harmed. They're singing a song no one gets to sing. And actually, in a reference, I might say, this might be like the wedding singers. I talk about that in another series, but that's just speculation with that too. But again, they have a weird response there. So here's the point about the 144,000. Their reason for existence is that they're there because the pre-tribulation rapture of the bride of Christ, I don't call them the church, the bride of Christ is gone. When you believe in a mid or a post-tribulation rapture or pre-wrath position, you have to ask yourself, why do the 144,000 exist? Are we just too stupid? And that's what they'll actually say. Well, you're just too ineffective, so you're getting replaced. Oh, come on. Come on. Listen, I am the part of the bride of Christ. I exist before the tribulation. These people only exist in the tribulation, which means today. If the tribulation starts within a few years from now, those people are alive right now. They're not believers in Christ because those who are in Christ would have that pre-tribulation rapture of the bride. Correct? And if that's the case, those people are not believers. But Scott is way a believer. You maybe way a believer. Okay? You're not ineffective in your circumstance. So to say that is to discount a whole group of believers. That's ridiculous. But if they're gone, meaning you and I are gone, well, God needs someone to put in place. And here's the thing, the people that God puts in place are the 144,000. And then later on, the two witnesses, Jewish people who will preach to the world, and they will have a massive influence there. Okay. Now, I know I was getting off on that one, but the timing of the two witnesses, as I just referred to a second ago, comes, they put them at the beginning, and they only can exist. I mean, it very clearly in Revelation 11 that the two witnesses, they can only be around for 3.5 years. So I go, well, why do you put it there? Now, this is a mild issue. I don't want to get off too hard on this, on them, on this issue, but they're, when you look into the witness and the statement that they say, I mean, they're really harsh. They have powerful kind of things. And I believe that they have a stronger witness than the 144,000. It's a different type of message to a different type of hardened group. So it kind of puts you more closely to that that second half of the tribulation. Now, I already kind of discussed this. The 144,000, if they're not there, you need a second group of people, or, which is two people, and there's actually a angel. It talks about one angel. It's real interesting. Angel of the Lord, who actually bounces throughout the world and preaches the gospel. Very interesting references with that. Okay. And then one of the real troubles I had later in this part of the story, I don't remember which one of the ones, is you got this kid named Chang Wong, and he doesn't have the mark of the beast. He's a total believer. Okay, you have to understand that. And then he gets the mark of the beast, but he also has the seal of God on his forehead, and he takes the mark without worshiping the Antichrist. Okay, that is so anti-biblical on that point. That's a problem. I know they did it as a fictional trick, but again, when you go off and you blow up, theology, you kind of mess that up. Okay, so that was a really kind of annoying thing. They wanted to have someone who could be inside of the Antichrist palace to, teach on it, but sorry, we might not know. I mean, people might not know what's happening there. So that's a different kind of conversation out there. Okay. Come on. Trying to get it to push forward. Then there's also a question about two earthquakes. And this is one I kind of wanted to deal with because a lot of people don't see this. If you see the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls as like one, I mean, bam, 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 as three separate levels of events, deepening in their worstness of that, you miss this point. So I'm going to delineate the issues, and they have two earthquakes. They have one big old nasty one in the middle, and then they have the big old nasty one at the very end. Okay, and so that's what they utilized in there, and I think that still is an area of weakness in there. Now it's funny because I kind of referenced this in the series, but at the same time, man, this has got to be like. Now, I watched it in 2017. Now, it was on TBN, and it was a YouTube video, and I'm setting up this office right here. And I remember this very clearly, that there's a guy who believes in a post-trib or a pre-wrath position called Erwin Baxter, who died around 2000 or 2020, and then Tim LaHaye died around that same time frame too, if I remember right. But they were actually on TBN, and they were hitting two different viewpoints. And Erwin Baxter brings up the concept of the seals moving all the way through the tribulation, the trumpets moving through the last half of the tribulation, and the bowls are the very, very last thing, that they're almost a concurrent setup. And it's one of the weaknesses of very, very heavy traditional viewpoints of end time viewpoints here. The sixth seal says this about itself, okay? That its sun is dark with sackcloth and the moon is blood red, okay? That the sky rolls up and the meteors and the comets fall, making men hide in caves. This is in Revelation 6. Now, I would say those are dumbs. You go, what is that? Deep underground military bases. This is where we have seen in our time frame here in 2024 This is when the cabal have been in those bases, those deep underground military bases. And you will find out about this in what I call the EBS, okay? Emergency broadcast signal, and you'll find out the true information about that. But it's real interesting that it says they'll be in caves. Well, that's exactly what you might call a dome. So it's a real fascinating viewpoint with that too. Now, it also says that the mountains and islands are removed. Okay, if you have ever been around the Rocky Mountains, my area in Colorado, if you're around the Rocky Mountains, I mean, that, what is Pikes Peak like? What, 14,000 feet or whatever? That means, do you understand? And especially that last earthquake, and we'll talk about why they say this. Every single place is below sea level, other than Jerusalem goes up to 1,500 feet. So if you're saying that this is a beginning of the tribulation kind of viewpoint earthquake, I mean, how are islands removed? I mean, who's left if you have a worldwide, that is like level 10 on the Richter scale of an earthquake or more? What's left? That's part of the point that you got to see in there. Second type of one, the seventh trumpet earthquake. Here are the things that it says about itself. Hail and thunder of massive proportion. Real interesting the way it does this. All fear his name and be destroyed from the earth. I mean, we're talking about, it talks about that all people, are, in essence, the bad people, are going to be destroyed from the earth, Revelation 11:18. And then secondly, it talks about a severe hailstorm that will hit the planet. Now, if I get this right here, I hope I got this right here, but that severe hail might be 100-pound hailstones. Again, you're talking about, that's an earthquake. We're talking earthquake, but this is in some atmospheric conditions. Okay? So like, okay, that's another one, but I'll show you how they correlate. Now, seventh seal, which would be Revelation 16 and 17. And seventh seal, which is the very last one, has lightning and thunder and says it is done. And that, oh, sorry, that's where it talks about the 100-pound hailstorms. So, sorry, the seventh trumpet talks about a severe hail, but then we have a 100-pound hailstones. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Like they're almost together correlated? It should make it mess with you, because we have thunder and hail and we have thunder and lightning over here. So I'm like going, okay. And we also have the sun going to sackcloth and the moon blood red. We have the sky rolling up in meteors, and then we have all these kinds of things happening at the same time. You're going, that sounds like awfully familiar with that. It also says that mountains and islands disappear. Well, it's the same thing that happens in the sixth seal. So here's what you need to see, is they're all one earthquake. It's so fascinating. This is some of the mystery that people get messy. They are all one earthquake in the end. This brings together and preserves the reality of the destroyed land masses of the world. I mean, when you see these, and this is part of the difficulty that comes in tribulation kind of research. That's why you got to go deeper in the study, and I'm trying to do that for you. Okay? Okay. And then it also tells you, correlates that Earth heaven time dilation. Every time we're on Earth, we're in a linear phase. When we move into heaven, it's talking from a heavenly perspective, which is outside of time. You see, if you're in heaven, you're not part of time because you're not alive anymore in that sense. I mean, in the mortal fashion necessarily. But if you are not alive, and you're in heaven, well then, you've obviously got an issue of the circumstances of change. Okay, so that's why I want you to kind of see that with that too. Hold on one second. Okay. So that's what I want you to kind of catch in there as well. So the time dilations kind of get messy when we go into heaven. And each one of these have that same kind of time dilation. So I believe it's really one earthquake, where he puts it as two separate earthquakes. Okay. All right. So let's show you the 7-year timeline preservation point, or this when we kind of see the correlation here. Okay. Beginning of the tribulation, the mid part, Rosh Hashanah, which is Jesus in the clouds, to Yom Kippur, which is the great great day of the wrath of the Lamb. Okay. Let me show you basic kind of points, which you've watched the series, you've seen it. We have the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. This is a very powerful war that is very, very limited. And there is a small little earthquake that's in eastern Israel, okay, where the Russian people, I mean, these Russian kind of groups called Gog, under their leadership of Magog, comes down, or Magog is the group, and Gog is the leader. So Gog, the leader, brings together a coalition of armies with that too. And they get destroyed in those eastern mountains with that too. So that's actually a pre-tribulation point, and we talk about that in the Hope in the Last Days series. And then we have the pre-tribulation rapture of the bride. Now I'm going to say something to you. I've had little custom discuss sessions with my wife, and she goes, "Well, which one comes first, the rapture, the pre-tribulation rapture of the bride, or the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war?" And I'm like, "Listen, I've done it about 300 times. I can put it this way, I can put it that way, I can put it this way." I kind of think that, well, let me put it this way. I don't know which one comes first. I don't really care. There's good answers for why which one might come first before that, but it's not full enough relevant, and it's very difficult to kind of put in there. But your job as the bride of Christ is to go up into heaven and be with Jesus. You are fulfilling Jesus in the wedding ceremony. This is a 7-year, or in Jewish tradition, 7-day wedding ceremony. This is in Revelation 4. They're giving gifts to one another. That's an inference that the bride and the groom give gifts to one another. Well, guess what? The bride doesn't have anything to give the husband, who in Jewish tradition and in heavenly tradition gives. The dowry is given from the groom to the bride. What's our dowry in Revelation 4? Crowns. And then we go, wait a second, this is way more than I need. I didn't do anything to deserve this. This is way too lavish. And God goes, no, that's okay. That's a point. That's a way of talking about a Jewish wedding. Now, most people don't see it because they don't see the Jewish traditions, right? It's kind of like you walking into, some Aborigine tribe, and they're doing some particular dance or movement, or they're all together doing something. You're going, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you're doing what you're doing, because you don't know the tribal customs, in essence, right? Okay, so we have the wedding ceremony in heaven, and then we have a very interesting part of the wedding feast. The wedding feast starts, after the first day or so of a time frame, and that wedding feast will go all the way through to the very end. Okay, so they go for 7 days. Now, we'll talk about this in a second. I mentioned to you the 144,000 are really important. They become in the beginning of the tribulation. And they come there, and their whole job is to preach to the people. That's Revelation 7, verse 9. It says that they preach to every person, every tribe, tongue, and nation. That's not just Jews. That's everyone out there. And they bring a huge amount of people to Christ, which I call the chosen. When you go into the word issues in Greek, that word means a guest. So cool. That word means guest. When you read Matthew 24 or 22, 1 through 13, it's the father doesn't talk about the bride or the groom. It talks about the father walks around in the wedding ceremony. Or wedding feast. He's talking about wedding feast. And who tells you the story? Jesus. But he purposefully deletes himself as the groom and his bride. And you don't understand that. Most people, if you do not understand the rapture points that are out there and the reason why they exist, you'll miss it. And it says, invite people in. And it talks about says that guests. Matthew 22:13 says, many are chosen and many are called, but few are chosen. When it says chosen, it's a reference. I mean, when you came up with names, they weren't random things like Scott has no meaning necessarily. It just means a Scottish person, right? In Jewish tradition, and actually in ancient traditions, you named a kid based upon a characteristic or a trait that you know about that, right? Or what you're presenting in, to that person. Now, this actually has a name too. So the chosen in here aren't just Jews, and a lot of people think of that, right? When it talks about the elect, the ekletos, this is called ekletos, and the elect are the ones who are guests in the wedding. So their job is to go up in the middle of the tribulation ish, somewhere in the middle, and to be guest at the wedding. How cool is that? God had a reason for why he used Matthew 22 to confound a lot of people. Now, the second half, no, there's missing people. This is the called, the kaleo, Kaleo. Kaleo means those who are invited, but they don't want to come. Read Matthew 22. All it talks about is decries those people who don't want to come, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other inferences of different people, and then angels being the messengers going out there. What would those angels be? Well, that would be part of the two witnesses. And then you have, the two witnesses. Let me back that up just a hair. Sorry. The two witnesses are part of bringing in, I believe, the called. But they were invited to the wedding, but they didn't come. They got their wedding invitation like in the mail, and they're like, I don't want to do it. Okay, you don't want to do it. That means you got to go away from the greatest ceremony in history, and you could have escaped some of this stuff. And these people, I believe, they'll escape. And it answers the mid-tribulation rapture. But it's not the who, because this is all, we don't get into the church thing. It's about the who. And that's why you need to know this. And we're going to teach this in the next series here about the groups that are in there. And I'm just giving you a preview of that. Okay, so we have the call, the two witnesses that go all the way through. And the two witnesses will die, and then they raise up, and there's a resurrection event. Not a rapture, a resurrection that they do. Because this is their first death. They have to die for 3.5 days, and then they're up in heaven. Okay. So when we come up here in the red, the Antichrist is the first seal. He has to come upon the scene at this time frame. And again, we're not going to get into all the little thing. And here we have the mark of the beast is required of the people. So it could be right here. It could be right there. I'm just telling you in that basic time frame with that. And then this is when you have the mark of the beast going on, it actually launches in hell on earth. And if you watch the part of the series, of the tribulation series, I actually talk about why people of the mark, they're already sealed. They're sealed to heaven, to hell, and there's nothing they can do about that. That's why I had problems with Chang Wong at that point. Now, we have the 7 seals that go all the way through. Then we have the 7 trumpets, right? And the 7 bowls that will go through the last, several days, okay, of that time frame. As much as a month. Some people look at it as a month. Some people look at it as days in that way time frame. So I'm fine with that. It's not a big deal. We can get too sideways on that. But notice they all coincide right over here at that time frame where it's the last thing, because then the 6th seal. But no, I will say to you, the 7th seal. We're talking about the 6th seal a minute ago. The 7th seal is a silence in heaven. I think that happens right here while that situation is happening. There's a silence in heaven. This is not about the earthquake. This is about when Jesus comes back on that last day. I should have made that a really thick day there too. Okay. Again, when we talk about this, we're talking about the comparison. Again, I'm not trying to beat up end time issues in your viewpoint. I'm not trying to tell you not to read it. I think there's always benefit in there because there's scripture over and over and over again. But you need to look at things critically in that way. And I think, you know, whether or not you believe in the rapture theory points out there, there are other things I think you can look at that are some difficulties in there. And again, I'm telling you from a guy who's read the whole series and loves it, but I'm telling you things that I find in there that are difficult. There's other things that they miss about the goats and the sheep separation that they don't get that one correct, but they're close. I mean, they're close enough. I just like to go deeper into the goats. We will explain that in a later time frame with that too. But if you like this, go all the way through this, like and subscribe it. It really helps me out. And you can know a lot more about it from the Dr. Scott Young, and you can see a lot of books in there. One is called Foretold, Book 1 and 2, that goes all the way through the Tribulation too. So we kind of did that as well together. Thanks so much.